Thank you for everyone for coming. I am going to kick things off with a question to Liz, which is that this is your first mid-career retrospective, so a moment to look back and take stock and kind of think about what it is that you have done or what broader project you feel like you've been working on. Or is it about, is there a broader project, I guess is one question. How does it feel to have a mid-career retrospective? Does it feel like discrete bodies of work that are interrelated? Is it about facets? I guess, we use the textile metaphor, which are always so tantalizingly there about continuing threads, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what it is to have this kind of retrospective gaze onto several decades of work now.
Yeah, thanks. It's first of all, thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. This has been a hugely meaningful and powerful experience for me, and a tremendous honor and a particular thrill and just incredible experience to work with you, Julia, on this project. It adds a whole other dimension to it that just kind of compounds the whole project and or just makes it more expansive, more meaningful somehow, also because of our friendship and the way we've been kind of informally collaborating for years through sharing ideas and being thinking partners for each other's work. I mean, that you were present in my thinking around so many of my important projects, including Knitting Nation, where I feel like almost every iteration I talked it through with you, from the beginning one to the last one. So, looking back, looking forward, looking in the present, creating a social space, it feels like, I think it's my creative work and career has been, kind of what you saw, what you called this show. Julia came up with the idea of the Mischief word for the show, and I think it very aptly describes one of the kind of ways that I make work, that I create in the world, trying to subvert things with kind of trying to stir things up or do things differently, maybe agitate, seduce and agitate. So I think that this show really shows a lot of different eras. I see it as chapters or eras or moments where I'm fixating on certain things. Sometimes it's even fixating on a particular technology. And so the show helps me see the continuing threads. I already know that about my own work. I had a very strange and kind of jarring experience at this point a handful of years ago when I was given back my box of woven fabrics from my years of undergrad experiments, and there are like a handful of fabrics in this exhibition that are from that time. I was in, it was from when I was 19 to 22, I was learning how to weave, and I got very deeply into weaving and to the point of obsession. And that's been part of my track record of like fixating on something for a while and feeling devoted to it until I can kind of exhaust the possibilities or get bored with it. Someone else might see it as that. And so I was given back this box of fabrics, 20 years later, because I had loaned it to a colleague to show to students. And I discovered in it that the kind of ideas and images and colors, patterns, all of it were the same as what I was actually doing 20 years later. Different, yes, growth, evolution, it's all happened, but it's still that same person making, kind of fixating on the same things. So I think I get to see that. And I also have been really wanting to make larger scale work. Knitting Nation was its own large scale project that was a particular kind of scaling up and monumentality. but to make objects for larger spaces that sit in the museum or the gallery and have that kind of immersive feeling without it being a room. The object itself can be the immersion that you feel when you stand in front of the Promised Land. So having kind of a space to experiment with that as well. And then to create, like taking systems that I use and bringing them into new contexts. So for example, this room, the Queer People, Places and Things, has become a system, just like Knitting Nation was a system, or some of the ways that I make things are systems or structures. And so this is a kind of system of design elements put in a space that then become a container for other artworks that are very distinct and beautiful, exquisite artworks unto themselves, but then together they become material that's another layer of kind of richness and information that expands and develops the kind of intimate spatial experience so that people feel kind of domestic space and all of these other things. I think that sort of answers the question.
It does, yeah. I mean, it helps. I like the idea of eras or phases or chapters where you dive really obsessively into something, but also understanding that, yeah, that the seeds for things were planted, you know, from the very beginning of you learning to work with textiles, and that those things recur or they mutate or you circle back. So to me, that's interesting to think about a mid-career retrospective, not only as charting certain teleologies or progress over time, but also showing like this circular nature, you know, how your involution of materials or the return, the constant return. So I feel like this exhibition works in both of those ways, you know, both with like a linear vector, but also with a kind of looping vector, which actually takes me to a second question. I always emphasize to my students who are learning about textile histories how you really have to be precise about these technologies. So the difference between the horizontal and vertical interface that is fundamental to weaving, and how that the properties that engenders are completely different from the properties of interlocking circles like knitting. So, and I was just thinking about, you know, the trajectory versus the return as kind of like somehow related to like that, the geometric versus the organic. So maybe say something to us about moving between textile methods. How you think, because obviously one overarching, I mean, a thematic, an ideology, and also a material is textiles. It's at the core of what you do. So maybe say something about textile methods and how there's ideas embedded in those methods.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, as a creative person my whole life, I experimented as a youth with all different kinds of techniques and mediums. I tried painting, photography. You know, my first choice in college was the jewelry and metalsmithing department, and I discovered very quickly that I didn't like working with the metal because it was hard and cold and dirty. Like, I'm not the person who wants to get my hands dirty. I like precision and kind of clean things, and you know, I think there's a part of me that's I identify with my father's kind of a career path, which was a mathematician and engineer, and also my grandmother wanted to be an architect, and I have this very kind of technical structural systems that there's a real balance of the right and left brain kind of always dancing around, like spontaneity and chaos in concert with very precise planning and structures. And so textiles really give me that. They offer, you know, in general, working with making fabric. I'm not talking as much about putting things on fabric, because, which I do sometimes. I mean, the interventions, I guess, that would be like, you know, taking a plain piece of fabric and cutting it and then putting something else into it. That's, for me, that's more of an intervention. So in a way, it's still building a fabric. It's making a new fabric out of other elements. So I make that distinction between kind of surface treatments of printing, or, you know, like this, putting pattern on top of things, versus building something, which, you know, when I was doing clothing, knits really became the thing for me that made so much sense, because in one concurrent process, you could easily build the fabric and the form. So you're like having that thing of building up this thing that can have all these different characteristics, and then at the end of it, there's a three-dimensional object without some post-production other whole series of steps. And I think I'm more drawn to the building of things and the kind of magic that happens in that process, where you're like, oh, if I do this and this and this, I make this thing that I could never even think of in my mind. I mean, I am a very process-oriented artist in that the processes and the materials, also a materialist, like the processes and the materials have long been one of the main driving forces of what I'm doing. Like, they're telling me what to do, you know, it's like a call and response, and I feel like my work is this big kind of echo chamber of calling and responding, or setting up one kind of thing. Like with the raised drawing in the front room that has those lines, the way that those drawings started is just laying down one group of lines to try to see, it becomes a game. You know, I really identify with Boetti, that artist, the Italian artist from the Arte Povera era, who created all these games and systems that tied into magic, and making some kind of game that has rules that I can break. Or like in the case of Ray's, laying down those lines and then making lines go off of those. So creating some kind of situation where then I have to respond to that, and then that dictates where I go next. I mean, it's been interesting in my career to have these eras where I felt like a devotee of a medium. Like, I have to do knitting. I want to learn everything there is about it. I'm a master. You know, I was very invested in that kind of idea of mastery. Like, I took the idea of getting a master's degree very seriously. You want to master something, you want to be an expert, you want to know all about it. But, you know, within a lot of these areas of textiles, you can never know everything. And they keep changing because of technology. So no matter how much you know, you're always having to learn a whole new thing. But mastering knitting and then moving into a place kind of post that where I said, oh, I have a lot of skills now, and I have all of these relationships with manufacturers in all these different areas. What if I kind of move around and free myself up and let myself use the right tool for the right project, you know? And I think that making installations and kind of starting to work in space after Knitting Nation, like taking a room on and turning it into a world, was a real catalyst for me broadening and letting go of that kind of devotee mindset of like, I'm only doing this. It allowed me to kind of, it's like an interior designer, you know, there are elements of interior design in these room building things where I'm really thinking about like, what are all the right elements that go together to create this world, and that means that I have to work in all of these different ways. Yeah.
Do you want to say more about Knitting Nation actually as a catalyst? This is a live performance that Liz did in 15 different iterations, and I thought maybe you could speak more to its development, some of the different issues that you raise with it.
Yeah, well, you were there from the beginning,
It's
remember?
true.
Yeah, the first iteration, which wasn't planned as like the beginning of this huge series that was going to happen over years. It was just a one-off that felt so kind of empowering and resonant and exciting that I said, oh, let's keep going with this. There's a system in place that can be carried forward into another context and built on. And it just kept going like this, like, okay, this is a project where it's again, a container. Like, I really do like that word, this idea of a container that holds a lot of things. So with Knitting Nation, it quickly became this kind of container or response to my experiences in fashion and textile industries and my time visiting factories, really the industrial factory kind of landscape, which can mean a lot of things. I mean, that can be a person with a mechanized weaving loom in their garage, or it can be a huge factory that's totally automated and full of robot machines, you know, where there are less people involved. I've seen all of it and traveled a lot to see those things. And early on in my post-college career, I went to Thailand and was going to have a job there as a designer at a silk company. And I was exposed to the extremes of have and have-nots in that situation in a really kind of sobering, distressing way that made me want to separate from that world. I got scared of it, like, oh, these people are being rewarded with money for breaking their bodies. You know, they get like this incentive, a cash incentive for weaving more yards of fabric on these looms. And then the shanty town next to the hotel where we were staying, and it made me feel in this way that I needed to talk about that through some kind of creative platform other than speaking, like making some kind of gesture towards the problems of labor. I mean, there have been some critiques of Knitting Nation, I think, that it's like making more labor to talk about labor. You know, there's a problem there, but I think there was also in me a very strong desire to lay bare this dance that humans do with machines to make things, like this kind of repetition and this body engagement with a machine that makes you become a machine, because there's something very like trance-inducing and transformative and and also robotic. There are all these layers of things that are happening in that kind of experience, and I wanted to show that, and the grueling labor, and also kind of show this medium that I thought of as alchemy, like, oh, I can take a cone of yarn and this piece of equipment and then like do these series of steps and make these magical textiles that I couldn't even imagine in my mind ever, and here they are. And so I was so enchanted by the things I was doing and teaching others to do, because at that point I was teaching and had these rooms full of students with the knitting machines, and I just thought, like, this is an army. What happens if we build something together? What would that look like? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of fascination took me through many iterations, and there was a kind of turning point in it around midway. It was around 2010 with the ICA Boston projects, where I really started to see Knitting Nation not so much as a way to deconstruct and reconstruct kind of iconic objects like the American flag or the Pride flag, but to use it as a kind of 3D plotting tool to plot lines and material and color and space. And so that kind of drove me into different places with it. And then at a certain point, I really felt like I had exhausted, you know, it was another thing I was loyal to a point where then I got like, oh, people now understand what hard labor is related to textiles. It was something like post that big disaster that happened in Bangladesh with the factory collapsing, and there was a real awareness about the textile industry and some of the realities that people hadn't been paying attention to. So there was this didactic aspect to that project that I started to kind of feel was tired. Like, I no longer needed to do that. I felt like I wanted to retreat into something more private and have the objects talk without me being there to present and tell stories. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you started it was a really important conversation to be having, because at that point, it was 2004 was the first, 2005, yep. The first Iraq iteration, war. Right, in the middle of the Iraq War. And I mean, it was always an interesting prompt to people, a challenge really, which is like, just look down at what you're wearing and, you know, do you know who made, do you have any idea where the fabrics came from, or could you imagine the labor conditions of what we're wearing? I mean, the reality was it wasn't a conversation that was super, super prominent. And it was actually through Knitting Nation and my involvement with that, with you, that it led me, I mean, I was an art historian very interested in questions of labor and questions of class stratification and the economic realities of artistic organizing, etc. And really thinking about textiles led me to a whole new research area, which is that textiles, of course, we think of, or there's some version of textiles that take us to handicraft. There's some version of textiles that also take us directly to questions of labor, of course, and to, the realization also being here in the north of England, which is of course where Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels developed their entire theory of what labor is, was around the Industrial Revolution and textiles and the mills that used to populate this very region, and the idea of the worker becoming a machine and alienated labor and capitalism as this grotesque system of exploitation. All of that is grounded in the textile production. Mm-hmm. So it really did feel like, oh, this is a whole new, and also in 2004 or 5 there was a kind of ideological return to handicraft as a way to, some of the rhetoric around that was, that we're slowing things down, we're taking the means of production into our own hands. This is a way to counteract fast fashion and the, velocities of factory fabrication. And just to kind of, for me, I felt like there were so many contradictions in those rhetorics. And I thought Knitting Nation was really extremely important intervention into that discourse.
Yeah, it did feel that way. It was really resonant, I think, deeply resonant for me in a way that I didn't expect until I saw it right there. And for a lot of other people, that's, that there's so much to say about that project and about the things you're bringing up. And, we could spend the rest of the talk on that, but it's touching on, this idea of like, not realizing what I'm seeing until it's there. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that is a real characteristic of a lot of the work tied to the process thing of like, I don't really understand what this is until I really have a way to, until I engage with others and hear what they see, and time goes by and then I look at it again. And I think that's something that happens again and again in these works, is that something, I have this kind of imperative, inside, and some kind of intuitive imperative to do something, and then I do it, and then it's different than I thought it would be, or it's exactly what I thought it would be, but maybe it's not, then it's still underdeveloped, and I might put it aside for 5 years. It might sit there, and I know now that other artists do this. I'm not the only one who pushes things aside like, oh wait, no, but it's still a valuable idea, and I'm gonna bring that back now, it's ready to come back, or, oh, it's just a matter of time. I think one of the things that's been so exciting for me, it's always exciting to hear what other people get from my work. I think that's something that's why we want reviews, because we want to hear what other people see, because you can never separate yourself from it. It's so deeply, as the maker, your relationship to it is so different than other people. And so when you get the impressions, and sometimes when they align with what you were trying to do, that's really rewarding. But in this case, the writing that you did, where it's saying things about a restlessness, like, you see me, when writers and historians really see me in ways that I can't even say for myself, then I understand it even more. Like, to have that named, that this restlessness, that sometimes I wonder, shades of ADHD, there's like this like moving around, or like complete fixation to a point of obsession, and then like a moving out and jumping around and flitting around and then coming back to that. And so, I think some of the works manifest in that way, or like the Promised Land and the Zagreb Mountain Rug come from a drawing that I did in 2014. And it's a typical process I use. These rugs are the same thing, the fabric's the same thing. I'll create some kind of visual experience, a pattern, or a painting or a drawing, and then let it sit, and then it's time to make a rug. So let's go back into the drawings. Which ones are resonant for me right now, even though I made them 10 years ago? They're still resonant because it's still that language. Oh, and then how do I change it to be appropriate for this particular context or form or medium? You know, like what needs to be changed to make it a rug that's successful? What needs to be changed to make it multiples of itself that create this whole kind of environment experience? Yeah.
Well, can we talk about, I'd like to talk about bodies, talk about how bodies are activated, I mean, very literally in the fashion work, but also implicitly in the abstract work. And maybe this is a moment to mention, you know, your feminist commitments, your commitments to queer, trans, and non-binary subjectivities. These are all implicated in the idea of a kind of a bodily relationship that we have to textiles, the haptic quality of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot.
It's a lot. There's a lot there. Yes,
that's layers, a lot to unpack. I mean, you know, just to touch on one of the things about the kind of non-binary or fluidity. You know, we use that word so much now, this fluidity, or like the non-binary aspect of things, like why does everything have to be black and white? What's in the middle? And that can apply not just to gender, but to so many other things. So I think with the work, there's a lot of fluidity. There's this shapeshifter thing that's happening that I was mentioning before, just this kind of way to kind of move and never have to totally attach, and always have it open to other ways of seeing, other ways of making, other ways of being. I mean, there's a lot of eroticism. Like my creative medium is, you know, so full of sublimation on the ongoing, like, where do I put all of my kind of erotics, my sexuality, my kind of fantasy, my emotions. It goes really into the work. And in fashion, that was really clear. And I started making clothing at a time when I was really doing what I felt like was kind of a emotional self-surgery, like really mining my insides and coming out and starting to understand myself as a person interested in something, you know, an unconventional life, or breaking out of these rules that I had put on myself that actually were pretty confining about being a straight person, that I wasn't when I was a kid. I was a very queer child and had girlfriends, and, you know, was a very kind of turned on young person, and then kind of created my own systems of restraint or control. You know, someone who wasn't actively parented by very present parents, you become your own, like, you know, very controlling parent, and like imposing maybe extreme rules that no one else would need to have. Like my rules for myself, I think, were more extreme than all those people can be gay, but not you, you know? And so I think that my creativity has always been, for me, this place where there were no rules, you know, where there was no need to do anything but fully express how I was feeling, you know. And so then if I'm feeling like, you know, excited about the human experience and being a human and being alive and being kind of turned on and excited and queer and having things that don't match up with convention, then it all gets to go there. And I think there was a moment where I made a piece that was, it was a version of Fire, the piece in that other room, that has like a lot of kind of chaos and order. There's very tight precision. It's a zigzaggy pattern, and it's like a cave. It's like vagina dentata. It's all these kinds of elements that fit together. And I remember when I saw it, like when it was made, I thought, like, this is really the pinnacle for me of expressing my sexuality and eroticism, and how it was called Euphoria. And I just thought of it as like the most clear manifestation of these ideas of what kind of euphoric sexuality was for me. And somehow through cloth, that becomes a very feminist and queer kind of statement about, like, even that idea of women's work, which I'm not always invested in for textiles, but taking this thing that's women's work that people associate with the feminine and making it this kind of aggressive, rough, wild, crazy, hard to control, hard to understand kind of visual experience, to the point that people don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's commanding and muscular. That's a word I always use. And I mean, having worn your garments, yeah, there is a way in which they're very powerful, you know? They had a sense of incredible power. They convey that to the wearer. But also, I mean, I have a sweater of yours that basically is got a kind of abstract rendition of bullet holes and blood dripping down, you know? Yeah. And I would wear it to, like, when I knew there was going to be like a tense faculty meeting, or just, you know, I mean, sometimes I would, and yeah, it is, I mean, it's subtle enough, you know, that it doesn't, that it wasn't offensive or anything, but it was also a way to convey some social significance in the garment, which was also about, you know, along with all of the power and strength, an incredible sense of vulnerability and the organs, you know, coming out, what's inside being rendered on the outside, you know, the guts and the liquids. I mean, all of that, all of those productive tensions are so strong in your work. So even within these really strict geometries, you know, there's also all this contingency with gravity and the threads dangling. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the idea of these, you know, productive tensions.
Yeah, I mean, what you're reminding me of this era of my life that was really like the walking wounded era, where I really did feel like I was wearing my heart on my sleeve. I liked that idea. I used it when I was doing my thesis fashion stuff. You know, I talked about that. Like the name of the collection was Second Skins and Dresses to Drown In, and I remember like the beginning of the movie The Piano, where the woman is, you know, drowning in this incredible dress. And like, film has always really been a heavy influence on me. Many movies come to mind when I'm thinking about my work. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking about the wounds and the vulnerability, and
I mean, sometimes you would build, I'll just say, like in some of your sweaters, it's almost like an armature, you know, or like a
armor.
Yeah, it's armor, but then underneath it, it's almost like you're seeing the viscera.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I mean, that was it. They really look like that,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and there was there's a coat. There's a picture of it in the vitrine or in the cases. There's a model wearing it. I called it the samurai coat. So there's, you know, as far as inspirations, there's all of this intuitive stuff happening where I'm mining my own emotional state and my inner landscape and my queerness and sexuality and all of that. And then on top of it, there's all this external stuff that I take in on the ongoing, like any other creative person inspired by what's around them or what's been done, like samurai armor, like the systems that people use to put materials together to make that kind of protective skin, you know, so that things wouldn't penetrate and kill them. And or looking at something like the Victorian era floral prints, and, you know, trying to make my own version of that through some kind of story about acid rain and global warming and, you know, vulnerability of another kind, like how vulnerable we are. So I don't know, I'm thinking of these wounds and this kind of aggressive, or like an aggressive visual experience that also shows extreme vulnerability. Mm-hmm. It's another duality that's at play. And I remember the one collection, or one idea I had rather, that was kind of in the same vein of the bullet holes that you're talking about, or the gaping wounds, was this idea of a giant hand that had sharp nails that would just go across a person and create this
gashes. Yeah, these gashes.
Like,
yeah.
I really saw it in my mind as like a giant going, you know, and that's like maybe it's my mind kind of dealing with anxiety and stress and distress, you know, like having those kinds of visions that are like, it is a kind of, you know, a cartoon to me. Some of these things that feel awful become cartoons of themselves and then translate somehow into material.
And they become exquisitely beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, they do though.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
I guess as a curator who knows my work, how was it for you to kind of engage with me as the storyteller? You know, like how to edit, how to select, how do you determine what registers as important to include?
Yeah, it's a very big question. Thank you for asking. I mean, the first thing to say is that what you see, this is a huge show. It's 4 massive galleries. There's a lot in it. And this is just this is just the merest glimpse of what Liz has done. I mean, you are incredibly productive. There's a huge body of work, So actually, there were a lot of decisions that had to be made, you know, and part of being a curator is to try to think about arguments in space. So, you know, what are the stories that need to be told, and we decided kind of early on that it would be a mid-career retrospective, that this was the right venue for it. It made so much sense in terms of Touchstones and their amazing legacy with feminist art, and also Rochdale and the textile industry, et cetera. So just how, yeah, I mean, it was about ruthless editing, definitely, but also trusting that your work is so capacious and it does tell so many stories that we could put things together. You know, it moves sort of chronologically, you know, sort of roughly, but there would be resonances. Resonances would come back because your work is also very consistent and it's at such a high level. So to me, it wasn't so much. Sometimes it's kind of a painful thing with an artist where it's like, well, there's like the A level and then there's like the B level and then there's like the juvenilia and then there's like, you know. I mean, I think one of the things so to me, this has just been a thrill and an honor and a privilege in every way and a delight. And the team here at Touchstones has been amazing. And I mean, the whole thing could be, I mean, the show is going to travel to other venues. And I really want to see a whole room of the fashion with some of the garments. I mean, there's a ton of material there. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see a whole room just of Knitting Nation and that performance that had 15 different phases. And so I think I can only imagine it being bigger. It's really hard to imagine it scaling down because there just has been so much work that is of such consistently high quality. I mean, I guess I have so many, you know, what ends up being distilled in a museum presentation, you know, it ends up looking very formal and very intentional in a way. And so many of the ways I think of you as a maker are about collaboration. So that part, I mean, you've made that really clear, and I love that we have this whole beautiful room that is about your collaboration with industries, so making rugs, making, you know, furniture, the wallpaper, et cetera, but also a collaboration with the past and with the present. So having works by queer artists from the AMA Foundation, but also the cohort of people here who, you know, the idea that you make that collaboration really explicit, and it's happening not just in the wall label, but in the space. Mm-hmm. That part is really meaningful. And so much of what you do also is about friendship and about making networks, and also about you're so generous. I mean, one of my earliest memories of our friendship was we went to there was kind of a queer cafe, or had queer-ish feeling in Rhode Island where we met in Providence. And we hadn't known each other very long, and we were just chatting, drinking tea. It was a rainy afternoon, and you were knitting, and we were just talking, and we had our catch up. And at the end of having coffee, you did da-da-da-da-da. Here, I just knitted this scarf for you, and you just gave me, I mean, this really beautiful knit scarf made out of incredible, you know.
Baby camel.
It was baby camel scarf that you know, it appeared as if, you know, you had conjured it out of thin air practically while we had been talking. You knitted it for me.
My special magic
skill. It
is
a special magic skill. And so the idea that you always are, you are constantly making, you know, but you aren't, and that you're constantly giving things away also. You're very generous. You're doing things in more informal settings. It's not always about where it's going to live on the museum wall, you know.
Right.
You make things for people to to keep them warm. And so I think that part is also, you don't really understand that necessarily in this kind of presentation, but I'm saying it now, for the record, that, you're kind of like, you do, well, I mean, it goes back to the idea of mischief and how, to me, that word is about how you travesty these distinctions between art and craft and design. So for me, a functional scarf is just as important, that you give away and you make over, the course of an afternoon, is just as important as like a massive installation, that these are all of a piece, is what I'm trying to say.
And the piece is me doing things to engage with others,
Yeah.
and connect with others, and clothing is that on a very intimate scale where I'm actually creating something that it gets to make you feel good on this very direct level. And then in this kind of situation, it's very different, like giving artists who haven't had work in a museum the opportunity to do that and suddenly be next to some of their idols. Like, who doesn't want that? And there's a lot that I do kind of like, I would want that. Why do I'm in a position where I can create that for others, so why don't I do that? Like, isn't that great? Maybe I can do, but set an example. Like, let's all do that. Let's all share. Let's all, have some selfless moments and be more transparent and more inclusive. And like, why do there have to be hierarchies? And that's another part of the mischief, is like trying to smash those for moments and let people just all be together, or create situations where they can have that. I was really, really influenced. I mean, I can never not acknowledge my influences in talking about some of these things. Like, the Janine Antoni piece Slumber and the Issey Miyake APOC collection really influenced Knitting Nation. That's a whole other story. But in terms of this kind of inclusivity and giving over space in a museum or exhibition situation to others, I was very influenced by the Rosemary Chockle show that I saw at the new museum that Lynn Cook curated, where I walked into this 5-floor exhibition that was a solo Chockle exhibition, and she was always one of my fans, of course, because of her work in knitting and commentary on industry and labor, and the shape-shifting nature of her work, and kind of doing whatever she felt like doing. I love that about her work, but that she turned over so much of that exhibition space to other artists and used other artists' works as material to create these vignettes. And I had never seen that. I may have seen it before, but it never registered the way it did so impactfully in that show, where I thought, like, right, you could have your show be also kind of laying bare of your relationships or your interests, your fixations on others' works. Like, she had in that show these glass flowers that were made by this father and son team that were in the Peabody Museum, and just all these weird things. And so that really kind of allowed me to see in a new way what was possible when I was given an opportunity.
And maybe we can just take a moment to revel in some of the special pieces that are here in this gallery, including, some of the highlights for me are an amazing Jorge Eilson, who's a queer Peruvian artist who really inspired by the Andean record-keeping system of the quipu, and there's one of his beautiful knots, someone kind of a direct touchstone, I think, for you in terms of textiles. There's a Leonor Fini, there's Pazo Razri's, there's Lubena Himid, there's Maud Solter, there's Andy Warhol. This is
David LaChapelle.
It's a really incredible assortment of things. And again, alongside local queer people from Rochdale and surrounding towns, including someone's wand, a beautiful poem. To me, this is really, it's incredible. And all against the backdrop of your very wild and wonderful and deceptively beautiful acid rain wallpaper that, you did invent these flowers thinking about, mutation because of pollution. So it is one of those things where it invites you to look closer and sort of question your you know, you kind of question your own vision.
Yeah, it's like the wallpaper is really subversively sinister, and has elements that you wouldn't know unless I told you or it was written somewhere, which is that there's an overlay that, you know, the branches and the flowers that are like weird invented flowers and tropical flowers blooming on branches with no leaves. That's strange, right? And then these dots and the small dot grid. What's that? It's a grid pattern kind of chart that I lifted from a New York Times article that was about global warming. And it was this chart that showed the rising temperature of the earth over 100 years. And it was one of those moments where it was like this graphically very beautiful thing that was very scary. And I just thought, like, okay, these systems, these visual experiences need to be combined into one kind of decorative explosion that talks about how perilous of a time we are in. And this design was originally created for another, you know, the first version of this show, which was called Cast of Characters, and it was in this queer bookstore in New York. And at that moment, I was really trying to communicate this idea of, like, in this perilous, fragile, scary time politically, it was in 2018, and environmentally, what do we need the most? We need each other, we need community, we need to be in a celebratory space where we can all come together. And again, laying bare a community, like, who are we as queer people now? And that show was a portraiture show where I wanted every artwork that was in there to be a portrait by a queer identified artist. And those were a really interesting array of things. And again, there was a breaking down of the hierarchy of, like, my interns drawing next to a Nicole Eisenman and a Micheline Thomas. And I love that kind of mix where everything's thrown together. So in this case, I mean, to have the elements of the AMA Foundation objects, and also I want to mention about the Yarur family, that family started as a textile family, and the original kind of worker revolution that happened in Chile was with the cotton factory that family owned. So there's this additional kind of mind-blowing connection that came through with this engagement with Juan and his collection, and to have these objects and to be able to have a rug. I mean, I didn't even make the connections of that resonance of, oh, we're having a rug, and there are all these rugs, and that rug says love, which is really the message of all of this, right? It's all about love for me. Loving people, loving life, loving art, and just to be able to meet people from here. I mean, really, this show was challenging because we started doing it in 2019. I came for a site visit, and then suddenly in the winter of 2020, everything got really derailed, and so it interrupted our process in a huge way. And so then I didn't get to do the things that we wanted to do initially around engaging with the community in order to develop something. It got very interrupted. And so to finally be able to do that with the cohort of people, even in a removed way, with the curators here, with Brian and with the cohort, through Zoom and through us communicating, and then you all communicating, they really made magic. And I know that even though they're not here now, I've met some of them in person finally, and it's just like, like, what could be more meaningful than that kind of connection with others? And to have an artist say, or like make a work for this room, not feeling maybe nervous that it wasn't going to fit with the whole thing, and then seeing it and how it couldn't be better. And then to give that person a moment of, like, success, really, exposure. I mean, artists want to show their work. We want to engage with others. So then we get to all be talking to each other in this room.
Well, maybe that's a good moment to see if there's any questions. I think from the audience.
Yeah, or comments. No pressure.
Yeah.
I know you've spoken like a lot about the fashion work in this state, but and the larger scale works in Gallery 4, you spoke briefly about them, but I know the Promised Land was commissioned for this project, wasn't it? You spoke a bit about that a little bit already, but I was just wondering if it was interesting to speak a bit more about the processes of that. Obviously, that was a new work. It's not been displayed in a gallery before, isn't it? So I was just wondering if it was interesting to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that piece is like a dream come true for me, and that's partly why it's called that, but it's also called that, you know, the Promised Land. Like, that's what I think of kind of in this context, like this queer kind of utopia, or like this something that's been promised as a place where everyone can be free, you know, but it's some kind of illusion and fantasy and fraught with sharp edges, I guess, and explosions. To be able to finally make a large piece that engages with the repetition that is possible with industrial textiles, with the scale and repetition, that's been something I've been chasing for a while. You know, like, because I work in so many different ways, and I'm also in this kind of constant hustle survival track of being responsive to things that I'm invited to do that might pay me, so I have to like get distracted for a while to go do that commission, which is interesting too, but it's maybe taking me away from this kind of relentless desire to work at a monumental scale using industrial textile machinery to do things with repetition and pattern and image that are only possible through that. Like, what you can do to build through modules, these larger experiences of visual information with industrial textiles is something. I mean, I could just do that for the rest of my life and be fine, you know. It's just like in that track, and that's something that happens with the work, where there are these different tracks and they're all equally interesting to me. So what to do, you know, I'm never at an absence of ideas, but to do this piece and to be able to make 7 panels of the same image and put them together to make this bigger mountain range expanse where it kind of echoes, it's like this echo chamber of itself, and have that a 40-foot long, or how many ever meters, it's like a long ass wall in a big room that even has room for other manifestations of that image and a whole other, I mean, the purple, the breaking down is also the multi-panel kind of project in its infancy, I would say. So yeah, it's incredibly rewarding, and I'm so grateful that I was able to do this and had permission and invitation to create something like that, and to go to one of my mill partners in Italy and say, let's do it, let's make that fabric. Yeah.
And I mean, in some of our early discussions about how that room might be configured, I mean, just from the curatorial perspective, you know, there could have been internal walls, we could have broken up the space, and I was very encouraging of you to seize that room, you know, and really think of it as one big environment, because it's pretty unusual that you would have such a massive space to play with that would have these grand proportions and these really high ceilings, and, you know, like, no, there should be some gestures. And I think the work really holds the space in a beautiful way. And I also really love the wall that has the piece Fire that Liz was talking about earlier, that is a bunch of agitating things, including reference to forest fires that were happening, etc. And that's next to a quite small and intimate needlepoint of a staircase. But to me, they are equally powerful, or they're equally engaging. And the discrepancy in scale is fascinating, you know, becomes a fascinating play.
I like it too. It looks, I would have never thought to do that. And I love how they sit together. And I also love, I mean, yeah, it's rare to have an experience to have this much scale. But then again, I walk into the galleries in Chelsea in New York, and I'm like, I'm so ready for this. I'm so ready for these big walls. Like, give me a bigger space and I will make the bigger work. You know, it's like, I love those. I love seeing the, what's his name? Mark, the
Bradford.
artist. Yes, like these Mark Bradford pieces that are just like these massive experiences of texture, like aggressive
Amazing.
decay and texture, and you know they're like that kind of scale does something to the maker and to the viewer that is unmatched.
Yeah.
It's not just scale for scale's sake. I mean, for me, I'm really interested in exploring the repetition and technology related to scale, and I think that's something very specific to the means that I'm using. Like, they're driving the ideas.
Right.
What? Any other questions?
I've got probably several
Okay.
questions.
All right.
I don't quite know where to start. Scale and intimacy in knitting the scarf, and then mechanical making processes. Where's your priority? How do those two fit? I nearly said knit together. Sorry. How do those two things fit? Sorry. Fit together. How do you feel about each one of them? Is there a hierarchy? Because obviously they've both got different conceptual underpinnings.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are different aspects of what what they serve. There is no hierarchy for me. They're all equally important. They serve different things both to me and to others. Like, for example, with the small scale works, they allow me to work at night. Actually, Freddie Robbins here in the audience is someone who inspired me. I didn't even realize I was taking in so much of what you said that time, that after you had your daughter and that you had to make small things at home because you get interrupted so many moments when you're parenting and your time schedule is all thrown off. And so I discovered that I started doing needlepoint like when I had this infant and I wanted to work at home at night. I felt in some ways very confined, so it was serving me in that way to give me work to do. I could work at night after the kid was asleep, etc. And it's very portable. But then also there's an accessibility to small scale works where people can afford them. People can fit them in their small spaces. There's a way that I get to be with others through those small scale works that's a different relationship than large scale works that aren't going to go into someone's home. No one's gonna live with those. They're just gonna see them. And so, unless it's a picture of a larger thing. So it's kind of ticking boxes, so that I get to exist in all these different ways and make things in different ways. The needlepoint has been a constant for me for the past 11 years since my kid was born, in that it's helped, and since I've been working more and more with industrial manufacturers to make my work, because the needlepoint is like the slowest thing I could possibly do, the most hands-on thing I could possibly do. There's nothing between me and the thing, and I'm making this crusty material, transforming this open mesh into this crusty little object, that has all of this enthralling patterning happening, and this grid that's asking me what I want it to do, and prompting me to kind of improvisationally move forward into different areas of pattern and games. And then working with the mills, and it's all emails and technology and talking and that kind of back and forth. So because I can never, I have to have my hands in it. There has to be a hand making thing happening at all times, and to a point of compulsion. So then I can't drop that. So I need, my needs need to be, my creative and compulsive needs have to be met through my work at all times, and these different areas do that. And it may be that there's a particular time where I'm not doing one thing or the other, but like I did so many needlepoints in the past year because I wanted to have a couple shows that were just focused on needlepoint. And I've kind of stopped, which is weird. I feel like something's wrong, but it's also just a time of rest to like not do that at night, to watch TV without having to make something while I'm watching it. It feels like a little bit of a crime, but we have to rest. You know, artists, creative people have to rest. Writers have to rest. You have to stop in order to like bring in new ideas, germinate new things that are kind of gestating. And if you're always making it, there's not time for that to happen. And I suppose working with the mills, it really works for me in that way that it takes sometimes months to get these materials happening. You know, you have to wait. It's totally out of your hands. And also I work with industrial producers that they're not art fabricators. They are working industry. They're serving industries. Like they're serving the interiors industry, the fashion industry. They're not like, what other artists can we work with to make 5 yards of fabric for hardly any money? You know, they're wanting more volume. And I come at them asking basically for favors. And so it's sometimes my favor is put at the end of the line, or in some cases, if there's someone in the company, in the case of Sunbrella, who is passionate about art and also works with Sheila Hicks, you know, we're like these two artists who are like doing, you know, helping this person who works at Sunbrella have like exciting things happen in the midst of like a hardcore kind of utilitarian industry. Like, let's do some exciting projects. Then maybe I get to the front of the line, you know, because it's exciting and does something also to show that that company in the midst of, you know, making the most useful outdoor fabric is also making this incredible, crazy, unconventional experience as well. Yeah.
Have you got any ideas, or have you already developed from your wallpaper?
This?
Yeah. Is that an end in itself now?
I mean, it's a particular aesthetic that you don't see anywhere else in here except for in the spider webs, maybe.
Yes, the spiders.
Right? You
yes.
see it there.
Yeah.
It's
I thought it was so different. I just wondered whether, in fact, that's the end of it now, or whether.
I don't know. I mean, what it does that you don't see a lot of is it's really taking my drawing / painting practice into its own kind of expansion that is still very present. Like with the pieces in there that are very graphic, they're doing that, but they don't show the hand in the way that this does. Like I actually did paint those branches and did it from observation. No, it's not over. I also love this kind of style of like I mean florals, botanicals, the natural world, and seeing figurative elements of that are a whole other part of my creative interest that is underdeveloped. I mean, I love botanical illustrations, and sometimes I see these residencies that are in gardens, like, oh, there's this one in California where you're at a garden and you're using that as a source. And I'm kind of, that's another thing I'm kind of like distantly wishing for some time in my life. Like, when do I get to do that 1 month where I just sit and draw flowers? You know, like I could do that. I love drawing. So, and I love this kind of decorative kind of, I don't want to call it feminine. It's just this kind of like, it's very different than the graphic abstraction that you're seeing elsewhere. It's like a schizophrenic kind of part of my character, yeah.
Like the spider's webs.
Yeah, I suppose it's a little romantic.
Yeah, there's like a romantic,
It's a bronze.
Nostalgic, you know, kind of precious antiquity and.
but all of that's at play, I think, you know? I mean, I think that's why I'm really happy. I feel like we're showing this show to me is a real triumph in terms of showing a lot of your sides.
Right.
As much as it is obviously, it's an excerpt, all of it is an excerpt out of what you do, but I do feel that it captures a lot of the, you know, a lot of the tones that you manage to hit, and there are a lot of different tones. You know, the work that has many different voices, or it creates different moods, and some of them are really about boldness, you know, and some of them are more, have something else, you know, or whispery, you know.
Yeah.
Sitting here and seeing the wallpaper with a view onto the panels, the wallpaper has a repeat that is much more seamless, like the continuity isn't broken, but you see the repeat come through. And the panels, I really love how they hang the little space in between, and there's a little bit of depth. And I wonder, you know, just thinking about some of the knitting nation stuff where the width is determined by the machine and the length is potentially infinite, and then they were stitched together in the flag, you know, to make a certain kind of continuity among the panels. And I wonder if the width of these panels was determined by their mechanical production, or how you thought about sort of the scale in the horizontal and multiples and how they relate to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the width is determined by the machine for sure. And with that piece, I made one panel as kind of a one-off because I wanted to see that drawing in a bigger expanse in a constructed fabric. And then I kept wondering what, if it would succeed to put it next to itself to make a bigger expanse, because there's this thing, I learned this expression not that long ago called side matching, you know, where you're matching the sides of the vertical on a textile design instead of just the tops, with a panel of fabric where there's no repeat within that's, you know, already matching itself. It's like, does the panel match itself? And I actually didn't plan it that the panel would side match, but it is pretty much doing it here, and that was a surprise. But I wanted to know if it would succeed to have the panels next to each other, and the creation of space between them, you know, having them staggering out from the wall, I felt was a way to create success through. I mean, and originally my plan for that piece was to make these 7 panels and then to kind of cut and paste and collage them together into like a big piece that was flat and had more of a kind of manipulation of the different mountains so that they could be a more cohesive experience, because I didn't think it would work to have, I didn't even think of putting them next to themselves. But then when I just got the pieces and was like, oh, this is going to be a huge labor to do this. Like, how are we're going to have to hand stitch all of this. I'm going to have to pay my assistants, and we're going to, like, how is this going to succeed? Let me just put them up and start looking at them. And that's another thing that happens to me a lot, where I create enough of the thing. With Knitting Nation too, you create enough of a system so that it's doing something, and then the rest is unknown. Like, I don't know if that's going to work, but there's enough good material there that it's bound to work somehow, right? So in that case, once I hung 4 panels in my studio and saw, oh, just next to each other, they're doing what I want them, that's what I want them to do. Suddenly I don't have to do all that work. I just have to, you know, work to hang them right, you know? So that's it. Does that?
Mm-hmm. It was really important to you that there were depths, you know, that it was staggered, and that did take work, and they did have to finesse that. And I mean, was it, just to go back to Joan's question, which is really interesting, was it a fear in your mind that it would read as wallpaper, you know, if it was all one continuous field? Or does the fact that it spills onto the floor and has that other dimension, and you can see the rough edge, that it's clearly fabric, I'm just curious if that was ever a consideration.
Want it to be a mural.
Yeah.
You know, I can do that. If I wanted a mural, I would have had it made digitally, or would have had it, you know, it's about textile production. Like, that piece is having these different levels of communication about what it is. Like, yes, it's a kind of immersive kind of explosion of a crazy mountain range that kind of, if you stand in front of it, it fills your field of view, and your body's relationship to the scale and all of that is there. But then there's this whole other story being told, regardless of the matter that's in the image, which is about, like, rolls of fabric, you know. And there's an artist named Wade Guyton who I am sometimes a fan of, and I remember when he was doing a lot of these works that were like long expanses of printed paper and or fabric, and having them kind of hang in these long rolls without a lot of artifice or, you know, framing. And I love that kind of gesture of like, let the viewer just take that all in without having to like prescribe a lot to it. Like, let's just see the roll. Let's just see the length, and next to itself to tell a very simple story in a way of like how this was made, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
I think we're 20 past 1. So
I think it's
wow.
perfect. Yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you guys all so much. Thanks again to Touchstones. And thank you to Liz for this amazing show and for being such an inspiration over so many years.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia, so much. Thanks, everybody, for
Thank
your
you.
time. Yeah.